Hi, it's David Shummy again, and I'm just going to have a quick look at this little oval mat cutter, and we'll do a bit of a review on how it works, and you can see what you think. A lot of picture framers, even professionals, would use a tool like this when they've got to cut an oval. If they don't have a big computerized cutting machine or some of the expensive oval cutters that are out there, this is probably the only other alternative that works really well. There are two models. There's one that's put out by Logan and there's also one that's made by Fletcher. But right here we're going to have a look at the Logan one. Now what do you get when you get in the packet there? Well, we have a cutting tool, and inside there will be some instructions and some blades. So we've got a little packet of blades and the cutting tool. Now the way this machine works is it gets positioned on the centre of the board, on the face side of the board. So you have to actually draw up what you want. And this machine will actually cut different sized ovals and circles, ranging from, well, if you set it on 0, what you can do is you can have a circular cutting motion, so it will actually move in a circle. And then this is a differential block that is within inside the machine, and that differential block enables you to set the width of the oval, and then you set the differential to the difference between the width and the height. So here, what we're going to do today, I've pre-drawn, or I haven't drawn, but I've pre-cut a couple of boards, just a red one and a cream one, and what we'll do is we'll cut a double mat board in these, and let's have a look at how this machine works. The other thing that you need to do when you're cutting is you need a scrap piece of board that you're going to put down on the table to work on, because the machine is going to cut through and you don't want to cut into your table. So always put a scrap piece down, just like when you cut straight. Step 1, we're going to draw up on the board. We need to draw up across in the centre of our oval or circle. So in this case, we're actually going to mark it up . I just make a little mark near the edge of the board. That would get covered by the rebate. And what I need to do is make a cross in the centre of the board that I can line this machine up with. And those lines, they want to be larger than the cutter itself, but smaller than the oval window, because you don't want to see these. These are actually going to come out on the dropout. So we mark him up the other way. It's always important to take your time when measuring up. The measuring process and the squaring process when you cut mats is as important as the machine that you use. A good tool can't cut a great hole in a board if you haven't got the thing all squared up properly. So what I've done, I've drawn a cross in the middle of that one. And what I could do is I could do the same thing here. We'll have a look at that in a sec. Now, on the edge of the machine, there are little points that you align with the cross that you've drawn. And on the bottom of the machine are 4 metal pins. Now those pins pierce this board and hold the machine in place. They pierce into the baseboard as well. So what we do is we line it up. I'm just going to adjust the size actually. Before I put it in, we'll put a blade in. So these take a specific blade. It's quite a steep angle on the tip of the blade. They're designed so that they have minimum force in the board that you're cutting. If you're ever going to cut a board by hand, it's far easier to use a scalpel with a very pointy blade on it than a wide blade if you're cutting curves. When you're cutting straight, the blade can be a wide angle because it will run along a rail and it will cut much straighter. But when you're going to cut a curve shape, you always want that pointy type blade. So Logan's come up with the right size blade for their machine. Now this is a 3-step cutter. There's a little lever that puts the blade in and out of the board. and you can adjust how your blade goes into the machine by the small turn screw here. So when we're going to run around, we're running around this way, so the blade has got to go in. I like to position the blade so that when the wheel's all the way through, the blade will cut through the board. There's a little stop there that enables you to set it. You can adjust that if you need to. So we've got our blade in the board. Now, these points we line up with the centre of the board, and we line them up with the cross we've drawn. So you can see on the end, and you have to look under there. We look over, we try to get that perfectly lined up. So when you've got your cutter in the right place, give it a firm push and push down into the board. Now that's actually in position. Now there's a small wheel that runs around on the board itself, so you generally keep a hold of the, or you have to keep a hold of the centre of the machine. You can hold on to the pin there too, and what's going to happen is the cutter is going to run around on that board, and the head here will pivot as you go. Now we're going to cut a little oval in this case, and I think we'll cut one that's going to be, say, an 8 by 10. It's a fairly common size. So there is a scale both in metric and imperial. So today we're going to cut 203 or 8 inches by 10 inches. And the way we do that is we set the width to the 8 and we set the length to 10. Now the way to set the length is to adjust the stop in the middle of the tool and bring it through to that 2-inch differential. So the differential block is going to allow us to set that so that it will run and cut in an oval shape. So at this point in time, the blade's actually not cutting into the board, but I'm just going around, and there's a little embossing wheel here. And what that does, that gets you a track, and that track on the board itself is what the blade will follow just on the external of it. So I've run around, so I've sort of embossed a line before I start. Now one thing I found, there are 2 points where you can put the blade into the board. You could put it in at the apex of the oval, or you could put it in on the side here. And I generally will do it at 9 o'clock at that position. And the reason for that is that is almost straight, and it is the position where the blade exerts the least force, or the board exerts the least force on the blade. So we're going to come around, and this next time I'm going to bring it, and as I get to that 9 o'clock position, I'm going to gradually click this down 1 notch. So now the blade is coming into the board, and what I've done, I'm holding the end of the bar and applying just gentle pressure. So I push down on this end, and what that does, that helps the blade cut into the board. Now when you come back to the 9 o'clock position again, drop that blade down another notch. And as we get through to that last one, we come through a further cut, and we go around one more time. Now after you've been around 3 times, you can just lift that oval out and you've cut your window. So here we have an oval window. That should measure, if we check the size, It does, and it's 8 by 10. So that's how you cut an 8 by 10 oval in a mat board using one of the Logan oval cutters. Now what we'll do is we'll cut back in a minute and we'll have a look how we cut a double mat. So what I've done here is I've drawn up a cross now on my inner mat board. Now that is again in the centre of the board. Now the trick with cutting a double mat is don't touch the differential adjustment, which is the width between the height and the height and the width. All you need to adjust is the measurement bar on the side. And so we're going to allow 1/4 of an inch. And so the 1/4 of an inch turns out to be 1/2 an inch adjustment. So we're going to make the hole 1/2 an inch smaller in this example because we want the red to be on the inside. But if you wanted the cut to be on the outside, you would move the cutter 1/2 an inch outwards, and that's going to give you 1/4 of an inch or 5mm strip of colour on each side. But don't touch this centre adjustment, only the measuring bar here. Now you repeat the process, you get it lined up. Lining it up is usually the most important part. Push it into the board and off we go again. We run around. Oh, just push it a little bit hard there. I started to cut. So really all I want to do is just get that track. Then when I'm ready to cut, come in and I bring it in just a small section at a time, one little step. Apply a little bit of pressure on the outside of the oval cutter. Now I go around, I went round twice there before I did the next step. One little click on the lever and the blade has gone down now about halfway through the board. When we get back to that start position again, put the blade all the way in. And that's why they call it a 3-step cutter, because we really do it in 3 stages. Now not quite through, so I'm going to go around just there again. Now take the blade back out and we can take the board, and what we've got, just got a little rough edge here. Now there is a way to deal with any little pieces. You can actually use a fine piece of sandpaper. So I've got a little bit of an edge here where when I was first going around and the actual machine, I pushed a little bit hard when I was making the track, and so I scored the board here. Now what I'll do is I'll show you how we fix that, because we can fix that using very fine sandpaper or emery board. But if we line that up, we've actually got quite a successful double mat. Now that's not bad for a simple little machine that you can use at home. So I highly recommend giving the Logan oval cutter a go. If you want to do your framing at home, if you frame needleworks, if you do family photos and you want to be able to cut ovals, it's a great tool and it's simple to use. So here's that little tip I was going to tell you, how to fix something if you've miscut it a little bit. Now with that oval, when I first went round, I scored slightly into the board in the wrong place, and that's why you start at the 9 o'clock position. But I put a little bit too much pressure on the arm and I actually pushed the blade down and just started to cut. So what it did is it left this little bit here where I'd cut part of the board but I hadn't cut all of it. Now what I've got is some aluminium oxide sandpaper. Now the aluminium oxide paper is white, and so it generally doesn't stain the board. And you've got to be careful that you don't actually drag this red colour down onto the bevel, because we want to keep that bevel nice and clean and white. And so where I've got this little rough piece, we can just see there's a small bit of red there. I can just come through and just sand that, working along until we've got rid of it. Now where you've got start and stop lines, if there are any, you can also come in and just sand those pieces. That's how easy it is to fix it.